countdown to a matter of days. 1 week from Tuesday will be the Michigan primary election. As we mentioned last week, sometimes primaries don't have a whole lot of drama to them. Not so this time around, not the least of which is because of the pandemic. Let me be joined by two of my favorite talkers when I want to get together and talk politics. On the right side of the screen, it's Jill Alper from Alper Strategies, and on the left side, Steve Mitchell from Mitchell Research. Thank you both so much. I'm curious as to, I'm curious as to what both of you think the pandemic is going to do, whether it means all of the mail-in and whether or not we're ready to handle that, or if it's going to somehow help one side or the other. Jill, let me start with you. What do you think the virus does to primary election day?
Sure. Well, we saw in the previous spring elections that an increased turnout. And for this election, our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, has mailed out 7.7 million ballot applications. She was able to do that with COVID funding provided by the federal government. We see that 1.8 million absentees have been requested. Usually at this point, about 507,000. Returned already 607,000 ballots, and that was 215,000 in 2016. So it's sort of a bad news, good news situation in terms of maybe the ballot mail out, making people more engaged, more aware that their elections, getting them to tune into who the candidates are, and they're certainly participating. We have satellite locations that are going to be open thanks to the passage of Proposal 3 in 2018, so people can get out and vote a couple of days early to avoid the polls. And then there'll be election day voting where clerks are taking extreme measures to make them safe and secure.
Steve, what's your take? What's it going to add up to?
Well, I think what you're going to see is an enormous number of people, and I'm seeing it in the polling I'm doing in legislative districts and other races around the state, that a high number of people are voting absentee that probably would not normally vote absentee. So what you're going to see is a much lower voter turnout on election day as a result of all these people voting by absentee ballot today. So generally, the higher the turnout, the Democrats will benefit from that. And if that's the case in November, then that will inure to Joe Biden's advantage.
Steve, we also know, though, that the president and a number of Republican leaders have talked about mail-in voting either not being secure or not somehow being fair, that it's too easy to take advantage of. You've been around this system and situation for so long. Do you find any of those fears founded?
I think in some cases the fear is founded. When you take a look at the number of checks that were mailed to people in Michigan who came back because the people aren't there anymore. So I'm an old school guy. I'd like to have everybody vote except senior citizens, those 60 plus, on election day at the polls. That's not going to be the case anymore. So we're just going to have to see whether or not we get a larger turnout because everybody has ballots that have been delivered to their home. And I think we'll see a little bit of that during this primary season, which will be over on August the 4th.
Well, let me let you both weigh in then on where your interest really lies and the races that you're watching closely. Jill, what has your attention right now of all these races that we're watching in Southeast Michigan?
Sure. I do want to say really quickly, though, Devin, that the issue of any kind of fraud taking place in vote by mail is really infinitesimal. There's serious consequences for it. It's very hard to do because of the practices of election officials. And so I respectfully disagree a little bit with what's been said here, and we'll see. But we've seen that there's no party having an advantage in states where there have been vote by mail for a long time, and it's just better for democracy. But that Oakland County primary for county executive has really got my attention, and I think a lot of folks in the region and in the state, because it's such an important part. We've got two very skilled Democrats, one person in the chair, one person who served as treasurer and who has won every precinct in that county previously. So that's certainly one of the barn burners, along with the congressional race in primary in Detroit.
Steve, that Oakland County race, let's start with that. It is as simple as whoever wins that Democratic race is going to win the whole thing, or do we have really good drama coming in November?
You know, probably. Mike Bouchard still does very well. Obviously, Brooks Patterson did well. At this point, the Democrat would be favored because Biden's doing very well in Michigan. But that's because Trump's been running against Trump. And once he begins running against Biden, I think that race is going to tighten. In terms of races I'm looking at, the 13th congressional race, I think, is over. Rashida Tlaib, in the most recent poll I saw, is up by 28 points. I think she's going to have a big victory over Brenda Jones. Looking up in the 10th district, that's a fascinating race. You've got Shane Hernandez, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee in Lansing, running against General Slocum and Lisa McClain. I think the most recent polling I'm seeing has Shane Hernandez up by about 10 points. I think at the end of the day, despite the enormous amount of money being spent in that race, I think Shane Hernandez wins, partly because of the contributions made in independent expenditures by Club for Growth, which is a very conservative PAC in Washington. So I think Hernandez wins that one. Shane, a very young guy, very bright, and running against some very competitive
and in both
campaigns.
Let me just jump in. I got to get to a break, but in both the 10th and the 13th, we've got races that once you've won the primary, you've most likely headed to Congress. Thanks so much, both of you, for your time. We'll talk to you again as we get closer to Election Day. Thanks so much for being here. This is for Flashpoint. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.